my distinct privilege to be in a strange part of the globe right now. I've been to Maine. I like Maine. I like people that live in Maine. That's my impression when I visited with you all. What was that? Maybe 10 years ago almost at a camp meeting. Oh, I love being back, and especially on religious liberty. Religious liberty is a passion of mine and was even before I was in the present truth. It was my background, my degrees and my teaching in the classroom. And when I came to understand the great controversy theme and the character of our God of love and how there's this group, these Seventh-day Adventists, teach very clearly and distinctly about the nature of God in religious liberty, I thought, wow, I did not know. I mean, I knew about the seventh-day Sabbath. I knew a little bit here and there about some of what these people believed. But when it came to God's character, religious liberty, the great controversy theme, it all started to come together for me. So I am so blessed to be with you. I'm so glad that we've prayed, because religious liberty is about God, who He is, what are His methods. And I want to begin with two examples from recent history. After September 11, 2001, an American talk radio host staged a hoax on his listening audience. In one jaw-dropping hour of radio, this host made suggestions about how to deal with what happened after 9/11, and we've got a threat in our midst, and we must be able to identify the threat in our midst, and that is all people who are of the Islamic faith. Now, he was testing his audience by throwing about a number of discriminatory and over-the-top suggestions, and then he opens the phones to callers to see how they react on a matter of religious liberty such as this during a time of fear. And maybe we should have all Muslims wear a distinctive armband or be branded with a crescent moon-shaped tattoo or have it put on their driver's license that they all must be identified as the religion that they are. These were some of the suggestions. Some of the callers were not happy with it. They said that's not appropriate in a country that has a Bill of Rights and religious freedom. But more of the callers said, you didn't go far enough, my friend. We need to have even more strong measures to protect ourselves from the threat in our midst, like internment camps for all Muslims. In fact, there was a horrifying poll that made international news shortly after this, found that 39% of Americans believed that Muslims ought to be required by law to bear a unique identification publicly, speaking like a dragon, to target, identify, and brand groups in such a way. Now, of course, terroristic, fundamental Islamic Quran fundamentalists who are engaging in violence, we would, of course, condemn in the strongest of terms. And as a religion, it is a false religion, a demonic religion. But we'll get back to coexist in a little while. I just wanted to share this as an opening anecdote that for students of history, what you think is a thing of the distant past, like why I had that on the screen that whole time, it's just awaiting the right context of fear for that latent bigotry and domineering attitude to rise to life again. It's not a question of if, but when will these sorts of moves happen? And then they happened. You all just lived through it very recently. COVID vaccination mandates, and nearly half of one of the two major political parties in America, when polled, said yes, those who refuse to take a COVID vaccination should be required to be housed in designated facilities. They should be internment camps for the unvaccinated. We didn't learn our lesson from Japanese internment camps during World War II. We didn't learn our lesson from the times past. We keep repeating like those who do not know their history are doomed to do, speaking like a dragon. Did you notice I took one example from one side of the spectrum and one example from the other side? That's important to recognize the name of this message, walking the tightrope of liberty, because you have times where one side imposes authoritarian employer vaccination mandates, bans the free exercise of breathing and smiling, and imposes mask mandates on children and their caregivers. One of the most diabolical edicts upon children and their well-being that has happened in our free land, once free land, affecting children's EQ, their IQ, their verbal development. These things were atrocious. Speaking like a dragon. It spends a generation indoctrinating the youth with cultural Marxism, imposing a woke religious cult that has flavors of cultism in religious settings, but it's supposedly secular. It's known as secular. It actually has its origins in Jesuit liberation theology. But let's now go to war against the secular humanists. Enter Christian nationalism. Stephen Wolfe. I couldn't get past the introduction of this one without having to just recognize this is straight up dominion theology, that the church is called by God to take power and to enforce and impose a Christian government upon people. Christian so-called. We'll come back to that. Is America a Christian nation? We'll come back to that. But he, of course, was advocating Sunday laws in his book. And then, of course, the mandate for leadership came out last year saying we want to advocate on page 589. Read it. Don't hear what people say about it, including this guy. I'm just going to paraphrase it, but you read that page, you analyze that and understand what this was calling for. It includes even secular business owners. If they do not close shop on Sunday, they are subject to financial penalties. They have to pay extra for those Sunday hours for their employees being worked. It's a little toe in the door if it was to be drafted as legislation and passed. But the idea behind it is a false idea. It needs to be called for what it is. And we look at the principles embedded in a statement like that one, that we want to promote a communal day of rest through the laws, through legislation, national laws about a communal day of rest. That would be a national Sunday law, not the final one imposing it, but it would be the beginning of that move if that was to become legislation. Now, of course, it does in that page 589 of Mandate for Leadership by Project 2025, it does make allowance for Seventh-day Sabbath keepers. However, if the idea is a communal day of rest, then you have to wonder, how long will that be tolerated for if we're pushing for one particular communal day? By the way, it's not only that side of the aisle. When you get to the climate justice 10 commandments, climate justice, that's not a term that I ever heard in years past. It's a novel concept. But at this climate summit just a couple of years ago, they went to Mount Sinai. And they said, no, not the 10 commandments of the Bible, the climate justice 10 commandments that will impose this globalist earth worship, environmental cult upon the world. This is not new either. This goes back to the 90s. Have you ever heard of the Earth Charter? Have you ever heard of the Rio de Janeiro Summit 1992, where they established the Earth Charter as a global United Nations world framework for environmental, they didn't call it justice back then, but environmental caretaking was what they would call it. And they used the 10 Commandments and the Ark of the Covenant as their aesthetic, as their symbolism. And they put the Earth Charter inside their, what they called the Ark of Hope. The symbolism is not lost on those who have a basic understanding of the Bible, that they are overwriting God's law with the Earth Charter. And the same thing with the Georgia Guidestones. They're on stone, written in stone, 10 New Age commandments to overwrite God's commandments. So you see these sorts of things happening. Car-free Sundays for the earth and all sorts of things that we could talk about. But I want to now, as a matter of that introduction, where we start to see the play on both sides, the tug of war on both sides, I want to remind us about this tightrope of liberty. It's actually the American system. Did you know that America is in Bible prophecy? Where is America in Bible prophecy? You can talk to me. Okay, the lamb-like beast of Revelation 13. That's in every one of our prophecy series that we do. Praise God. It's a clear prophecy. Did you know America is also in Revelation 12? This one doesn't always make the cut. into our prophecy series, and it ought to. And here's why. When you start reading in Revelation 12, in verse 1, you see a woman. Do you know what a woman represents in Bible prophecy? Okay, and she's clothed with light, sun, moon, and stars. What is light in the Bible? Thy word is a lamp to my feet, a light to my path. So it represents God's word. Thy word is truth. So this is a woman with the truth, with the word of God. This is the true church, the Bible church. The woman all down through the ages is covered in Revelation 12, going way back to when Jesus was born, all the way through to the end of time. Revelation 12 is wide scope. It actually goes to before that to the great controversy in heaven in Revelation 12. It's a zoomed out chapter, but this woman is being with child in verse 2, and she cries out in labor to give pain to give birth. Who is she giving birth to? Well, in verse 5, she bore a male child who was to rule all nations with the rod of iron. Messianic language, are you hearing there? Who was the only male child who was to be born of the church of God, of the people of God, literally the lineage of Abraham, the seed of Abraham, to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. That's Jesus. And it says we know it's Jesus because the very next part of the sentence is he's caught up to the throne of God. And there's only one who had an ascension after being born in a very special way with the dragon Satan trying to devour him as soon as he was born. That's Herod. Herod said, we want to kill all those babies to try to take him out. Verse 6, the woman, however, when Jesus goes to heaven, is going to be protected. She flees into the wilderness where she has a place prepared for her. For how long do you remember? 1,260 days, which prophetically would be years, the same time frame of the Antichrist power. The little horn, the man of sin, the beast power of Revelation 13 has that same time period, alternately called 1,260 days, or 42 months, or a time times and half a time. This is review for most of you. If you're like, what did you just say? Time times a half a time? This guy's going way too fast. Email me and I'll send you who is the Antichrist message. It's super clear from the Bible. He's not some guy who comes out in the UN or Israel in the future after the secret rapture and the world continues on for 7 years. There is so much nonsense out there about prophecy. I want you to hear it only from the Bible, not from a teacher, not from any prophecy guru anywhere. Just what does the Bible say? ScottRitsema@gmail.com. Say, please send me the information about the Antichrist. Papal Rome. Dark Ages church for 1,260 years, 538 AD to 1798 AD. Don't take my word for that if you've never studied that out, but we're going to move forward for the sake of time. The church is taken care of for that length of time, and then it restates it in verse 15. It says, so the serpent, who's that? Satan, spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. Now here are the key words. Verse 16, and the earth helped the woman. So Satan's trying to persecute the church. She's protected for 1,260 years, and toward the end of the story, that's the second to last verse in the chapter, toward the end of the story, it is stated that the earth helps the woman. Okay, we got to do some prophecy now together. What do symbols in prophecy represent? We got serpent or dragon. That's that serpent of old called the devil and Satan. The woman, the church. What does water, what does earth represent? Well, what is the opposite of earth in the Bible? God separated in Genesis 1 the water from the what? The dry land. And we can find out what water represents very clearly in Revelation 19, verse 10. It's many multitudes, peoples, nations, and tongues. Can you just say, a lot of people? So what would earth represent then? The opposite of waters. Waters are what? Lots of people or not lots of people? Waters are lots of people, so earth would be the opposite of that. Not lots of people. So there's going to be a place where the woman is protected and helped that is less densely populated than the waters, many multitudes of people. Now waters is interesting because you see waters in Daniel 7. You see waters in Revelation 13. Waters are where these beasts are coming out of. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome. And then in Revelation 13, the Antichrist power. They're all coming out of the waters. Where did these empires arise? In the old world, the cradle of civilization. Europe. So maybe there's another place on the earth that's not so densely populated that will be a haven for the persecuted church toward the end of the 1,260 years, in other words, around 1798. Isn't that interesting? Now, when you go to Revelation 13, somebody mentioned the second beast, the lamb-like beast. He's arising, the last nation to arise in Bible prophecy, other than the kingdom of God, but the last human nation to arise, happens right after the papacy is taken captive. In chapter 13, verse 10, it says, "He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity." Do you know that a pope was actually taken captive and the papacy ceased to have civil power for a time? The year of that was 1798, right on time, according to the prophecy, 1,260 years, right when Bible prophecy students were saying, we expect the fall of the papacy soon. Some were. It happened, and then the very next verse is, "And I saw another beast arising out of" what? The water or the earth? The earth. So you see the earth twice here, and both times it's referring to this place that arose as a nation around 1798, was a haven for the persecuted church. And there are more identifiers in chapter 13. It has two horns like the horns of a lamb. So it's got lamb-like qualities. Brand new in all of these nations. Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece, and Rome. They have like iron teeth and iron claws, and they're "arise, devour much flesh." This one is rising slowly to prominence around 1798, has lamb-like or Christian qualities, does not have any crowns on its horns, so it's not a monarchy like the others that you've seen. And also, it assumes worldwide influence and power, because you're going to get to some more things about this beast where it goes rogue and starts speaking like a dragon. You are well aware, most of you, that this refers to America. So when we do a message on religious liberty, we actually get the privilege of looking at the founding of this land and how God brought about a place where Christianity could flourish because of the principles of religious freedom that we're going to study tonight. Now, I want to ask a question, though, before we go into it. In Revelation 13, it's shown as a lamb-like nation, and then it says at the end of that verse, and it says in verse 12, Verse 11, "Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and spoke like a dragon, and exercised all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and created the image to the beast, and then the mark of the beast is imposed. No buy, no sell, death decree." That's the rest of the chapter. So I have a question on the screen. Was America speaking like a dragon from its inception in 1776 or 1787 or 1791, depending on you like Declaration of Independence, Constitution, or Bill of Rights? Or was America speaking like a dragon from its inception? Because this right here has a question about slavery. America tolerated slavery. And when you read in the Spirit of Prophecy writings about that, it was unacceptable. And God punished even the North during the Civil War for tolerating slavery for so long. So was America speaking like a dragon? Of course, because slavery is satanic. But I have another question. When is the actual fulfillment of the speaking like a dragon prophecy? That's an important distinction. Speaking like a dragon is vaccine mandate. Speaking like a dragon is hating my neighbor and stealing from him. There's a lot of things that are dragon-like, yes? But this is a specific prophecy about a specific time. And what is the time? He exercised all the authority of the first beast in his presence, calling fire down from heaven, erected an image to the beast, and imposed the mark of the beast. So the America speaking like a dragon is actually pointing us to the last days. This is an important distinction because when we look at America's constitutional government as founded in the founding generation, neither prophecy nor the Spirit of Prophecy identify any of that as being dragon-like. The dragon-like action is where we see the prophecy fulfilled about the imposition of the mark of the beast. What do we see initially in the text? We see a beast with two horns like a lamb. We understand that to be civil and religious liberty at the core of the founding of this nation. Now, there is an anti-Americanism that has taken hold in many theological circles that even teach these prophecies, but are diverting us from appreciating the founding of this land. It's like an Adventist version of the 1619 Project. It was a nation conceived in iniquity with nothing to be celebrated, with nothing to be appreciated. And I've challenged those who hold that view that America was dragon-like from the very beginning. I've challenged them to read chapter 16 of the Great Controversy. I recommend everybody do that. And chapter 16 of the Great Controversy is the chapter about America's founding. And what I've challenged people with is this: if that inspired telling of American history is something that doesn't resonate with your ideological worldview, you might want to rethink your relationship with the spirit of prophecy and allow it to challenge the preconceived notions that you have about denigrating the founding. It certainly was not flawless. It certainly had its problems, which needed to be dealt with in the Civil War. But there were such bright beams of light shining forth out of that dark time that if we don't recognize and celebrate those, we miss out on a great opportunity to reveal God's character. So here's what inspiration says about our founding. It refers to the Declaration of Independence as, can you read that? That grand old document. Grand old document, which our forefathers set forth as their Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence. They declared, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Spirit of Prophecy speaks highly of America's founding documents. Now, it also in chapter 16 is even-handed. It fairly criticizes the Puritans, Massachusetts Bay Colony, for the imposition of their Puritan religion upon dissenters and outlawing dissent and banishing dissenters and being cruel toward those who had a different doctrinal position than the ruling state church, which there ought not be a state church. We'll come back to that in just a minute. So it's honest about America's history, including elsewhere outside of the Great Controversy, honest about the sin of slavery. What a diabolical institution that was. Within the Great Controversy, American slavery is not mentioned, but it's clear that not all was perfect. These are human systems. The Puritans, boy, did they drop the ball. It goes into that in great detail. And we also, at the same time, while being honest, have to be, frankly, courageous enough in these polarized times to recognize the validity of our Constitution, Declaration of Independence. I know that's kind of crazy to say, like, what? You have to be courageous to actually celebrate America's founding? You sure do in academia, I can tell you that from experience. Our founding documents are awesome, and I've never budged from that because I believe God was involved with the founding of this nation. What we mean by that, what we don't mean by that is very important. We're going to have to walk a tightrope as we go forward. So we want to keep that understanding clear. But I'm going to tell you a little bit later that some of the most biblical words ever uttered by just common man are found in that Declaration of Independence, in that grand old document. I want to ask, why is it that so many have taken from that document their inspiration for their yearning for freedom? Why is it that so many have looked to that document, the Declaration of Independence, as their inspiration? Where did this come from, this self-evident truth? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that we have the right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Well, I know where it came from. God has put eternity in the hearts of men. God has put enmity between us and the serpent. There's something within us that recognizes that God himself, who told us to choose, he's given us the freedom to choose. That's saying something. God, the very one who has the ability, the authority, the right to command our worship and subservience and obedience, that very one is the one that said, now choose if you will worship me. Do you realize how radical that is? In the history of religions, in the history of the human experience and how humans conduct themselves, the sovereign God is the one that said, now I'm giving you freedom. Huh. What did Jesus say is the greatest commandment in all of the law? love Him. Think about that. We usually use the term worship in these kinds of conversations when we're talking about religious liberty. But God frames it in terms of a relationship. It's a worship relationship, but He uses the word love. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength is the greatest commandment of all. Now you know why He doesn't force us to worship. Now you know why He doesn't force. Because can love be forced? Love cannot be forced. Let's use the romantic example. Picture on the left is where I proposed to my wife in November 9 of 2002. That's a stock photo. That's not me and her. But that's an actual photo of where I proposed to her. Okay, now, the reason that it meant so much to me that she said yes is because she could have said what? She could have said no. Now, what if I realized that fact, like, okay, I'm going to make sure I secure the deal, and I'm coming prepared. Because if she might hypothetically go into the, I don't know if it's the right time or whatever, I got to have a backup plan, so I come packing heat. And she, okay, no, you will say yes. I mean, we're laughing awkwardly, nervously, because this is such a weird scenario, because we all know how any ounce of love that might have been in that room would be immediately extinguished, because force and love cannot coexist. Freedom is the soil out of which love can grow, and the only soil. Any amount of compulsion that would have been applied in that situation would have annihilated love. The desire to exercise our free will, which is a natural endowment of God. Thomas Jefferson called it self-evident. He called it the laws of nature and nature's God. You should read the Declaration of Independence again. The laws of nature and nature's God are addressed in there. It's like this natural right, this self-evident truth that we have the desire to exercise our free will. It's because God put that within us. And the Bible says that. That's why we human beings love liberty, because we were made to love. We love liberty. We enjoy liberty. We value liberty because we were made to love and to be loved. So freedom is within our spiritual DNA. And there is, however, the opposite of that. That principle in the universe got introduced, didn't it? There's a being out there whose agenda is to run around and take away people's freedom, people's freedom in Christ. Satan wants to rule, to conquer, to dominate. Satan wants, as the counterfeit dragon, the beast, and the false prophet of Revelation 13, seeks to impose a false system of worship by force. You may not buy or sell. You will have a death decree upon you. And he starts with deception. Yeah, he's a murderer from the beginning, but he's also the liar and the father of lies, isn't he? And what did Herod do to start with the Magi, with the wise men? He said, you tell me where the Messiah has been born, because I too want to worship him. You tell me where you find him. So it claims to be something it's not. It's deception, just like the papal system. And then when that doesn't work, he resorts to mass murder. And so authoritarianism is satanic. It is the opposite principle to that which governs God's universe, which is the principle of love and free will. Authoritarianism of any kind is satanic. When you write in a Christian paper even, now we must understand that those who choose to remain unvaccinated appropriately will have their freedom to travel and hold a job restricted. I'm quoting pretty much from a publication that came out during COVID, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was speaking like a dragon. It was satanic under this guise of Christian publishing. Now, this tells us something wonderful about God's character. Because unlike Satan, God actually is the Almighty. He has the right to demand our worship and snuff out anybody who disagrees. But the very fact that rebels are still running around in his universe, living, proves he's a God of freedom. People say, how could an all-powerful and all-loving God allow pain and suffering? He must not be loving. No, the pain and suffering are proof that he is loving. Because if he wasn't, he would have annihilated it at the first step. He has the right to. But he is love. He wants us to love him back. So why do we do religious liberty? This is an important question. First of all, the last rays of merciful light, the last message of mercy to be given to the world, is a revelation of God's character of love. This is like the final act of a recognition of the issues at stake in the great controversy, is us knowing God. What did Jesus say? And this is eternal life, to know God, to know him as he is, to see him as he is, as John put it in 1 John. That's Christ's Object Lessons, page 415. The very last rays of merciful light is our privilege to reveal God's character to the world. And religious liberty does that, doesn't it? I mean, we've just seen that last few minutes. Big time. Also, a humanitarian impulse that we all ought to have. Helping people on a practical level. Religious liberty, advocacy, and practical assistance, whether legal or whether through pastoral letters or other ways that we can help people making appeals to conscience in the laws while we still have these freedoms recognized by American courts. This is a way where it's kind of like another right arm of the gospel. I put up on the screen, we can preach prophecy about religious liberty and God's character, but they won't care how much you know until they know how much you care. This is a true humanitarian impulse that is a Christ-like attitude towards suffering people that we need to demonstrate. Also, religious liberty is part of the third angel's message, because the third angel's message warns, don't take the beast's mark. The beast's mark, of course, is forced. And we reveal why that's bad by religious liberty teaching. Forcing worship is wrong, as we're going to continue to study. And then we tell people, now here's the answer, the seal of God. And so we show that issue that Satan has raised in these last days to think to change times and laws. We show the counterfeit and we show the true. We say, this was cooked up by man. We don't go by tradition. We go by the righteousness of Christ alone. That's the third angel's message in verity. And God's seal, his Sabbath commandment, is a reminder that it is God who is the creator, and it is God thus who can do the recreating. We are saved only by him instead of a system of works. So it shows the counterfeit versus the true, and who has the authority to proclaim a day holy. But even more than a matter of authority, go deeper into these issues, and you see the methods used reveal Satan's character and God's character. Force versus freedom. Okay, so now we're going to do the history. The tightrope of liberty is America in the center, and then I've got two competing systems that are opposites, but actually the same. You're going to see as we go forward. So we're going to tell three different stories, two varieties of tyranny on each side of the tightrope there. And I want to start with the Dark Ages church. The story of this, actually, you can trace it to this man on the screen. Do you know who that is? That's Constantine, who claimed to have seen a vision, a sign of the cross, and was told, in this sign, you as a pagan Roman Empire, in the sign of the Christian cross, are going to conquer. You're going to gain military conquest and victory as a Christian emperor. That was the delusion that he was given by the enemy. And it was public policy to merge the pagan and the Christian elements of the citizenry in a political strategy that transformed the Roman Empire at the time. But can you think of any New Testament teachings that the church is supposed to conquer people with the sword and the state and a military empire? No, of course not. There is no such thing in there. But a system of 1,000 years flowed from this, where popes and kings and feudal lords, through religious and political and economic systems of hierarchical power, established domination over the Christian world. It was not a time of individual freedom. That's why it's referred to as the Dark Ages. During this time, religious, I have to put this in quotes, truth was simply deferring to the proclamations of the religious authorities. The Protestant Reformation is going to change this when we get to that. We understand sola scriptura, God's revealed word, comparing Scripture with Scripture, being a Berean, knowing for ourselves what is truth, gathering scriptural evidence, evaluating it, testing it, and knowing from the experience of studying for ourselves. Now, just for fun, since I framed it that way. Who is the ruling religious hierarchy of today? I'll give you a hint. The priestly robes of the Roman Church have been exchanged for white lab coats, and titles like bishop, cardinal, and pope have been exchanged for titles like director of such and such agency. How about this? Attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science. So it's easy to criticize, but really they're criticizing science because I represent science. I represent science. Okay, 7th grade science class. You've all been through it, right? Did you learn the basic definition of science? It's the scientific method. Science is a method whereby we arrive at an inference, tentative perhaps, but we conclude something based on a method of forming a hypothesis, gathering evidence to test the hypothesis, analyzing the data, and then drawing inferences from that and seeing if it's repeatable and challenging the hypothesis or the conclusion drawn. That's very different than what we're hearing here, yes? One man represents science, and attacks on him are attacks on science. He must not mean science in the same way that we learned the word meant decades ago, yes? Well, what is science today? I mean, language changes. You've got to be very sensitive to the changing meaning of words. When they say follow the science, what are they saying? Are they saying follow the scientific method? Not at all. What they're saying is rather than the scientific method, which is the process of challenging consensus by experimentation, this science, so-called, is now simply trust the consensus, which they falsely call science. And what is the consensus? The consensus is the belief system of a collection of people at the top of the hierarchy who have positions of influence, power, or academic credence given to them by the system. And so truth is now, again, proclamation by those in authority, just like it was during the Dark Ages, yeah? We're talking scientific truth instead of religious truth, but maybe there's not so much division between these as you might think. Because is this not then a religious cult? Trust the science. It's the scientific community. I was just talking with a friend about this. That phrase scientific community, I have a social science background. The word community didn't enter into my 7th grade science class. It entered into the social sciences. Community, that's a social science term. That's a fuzzy science. When I make fun of my own field, I go social science, okay? It's not hard data-driven science as much as the hard sciences are. But the hard sciences have been totally cast out the window because the scientific method is gone and now we trust a community. That's going to enter into groupthink sorts of psychology, mass formation events. Oh man, if we had time to cover what is mass formation. But we got to keep going forward. That was just an aside as we're thinking about the Dark Ages system and how it repeats under this new veneer of science. But this Dark Ages oppressive religious power ruled for centuries by the sword. The Bible in the common tongue was outlawed. People were had ignorance imposed upon them. However, the Waldenses, John Huss, John Wycliffe, others attempted to translate the Bible and bring Bible truth, the light of truth to people once again. Remember, the woman was protected for 1,260 years, including many years when there wasn't an America. And so there was always a church. There was always the truth. It was never snuffed out. It was a torch that was carried forth from generation to generation in various places. But what happened to those who tried to bring Bible truth during these times in the 1300s and 1400s? Burned at the stake. The Protestant Reformation in 1517 starts to get some protection for religious freedom. Martin Luther in Germany, the German princes declare for the Reformation, followed by Switzerland, the Netherlands, Scandinavian countries, many places in Europe. Nation by nation, Europe was being liberated, and people were able to have their Bible faith in Jesus Christ and their religious liberty to a great extent compared to what they had. France was up next. Are we going to declare for the Reformation too? John Calvin is giving his all to the mission in France. But his efforts at Reformation in France were destroyed by Catholic and French authorities, and he had to flee. He ended up in Geneva. But the Protestants that did remain, they had so much persecution that many of them had to flee as well. And many of them fled actually to the Netherlands. Interestingly, they were called the Huguenots. And I have the privilege to say I have Huguenot ancestry. Now, we all have Huguenot and Waldensian and apostolic spiritual ancestry. But it's kind of fun when you can trace your own lineage that way as well. Anyway, the sad thing happened in France. Those Protestants that did remain were slaughtered. Tens of thousands in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre alone. And now at this point of the 1500s, Roman papal rule is well known as the brutal, ruthless, bloody force that it is. Let's say this as clearly as possible to anybody who might be listening to this, aghast at the history of Christianity. Listen, I'm with you. Christianity that attempts to rule with the sword and enforce its dogma, whether that's biblically correct or incorrect, is not Christianity. I've had exchanges with people who are skeptics who say, how could I believe in your religion? They persecuted others and they've got blood on their hands. I said, the Bible actually addresses that whole Dark Ages experience. And you know what the Bible calls that? Antichrist. You know what Jesus taught? Jesus said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles, pagans, unbelievers, they lord it over them. And they exercise authority over them. But it's not supposed to be that way among you, my disciples. The Christian church is founded to serve others, to not lord it over others like the rulers of the Gentiles. And then you ask the skeptic, have you read the life of Christ in the Gospels? What about Jesus do you object to? Anything? Oh no, Jesus was a good man. Yeah. So what you object to is Antichrist. So you like Jesus. Yeah, me too. We actually agree. Yeah. So there we go. But the thing about France is the people in France by the 18th century, they had hundreds of years more of this than most Western European nations. And they were fed up. They were fed up with the church, the monarchy, the feudalism, and they threw this system off with ruthless revolutionary violence. It was 1780 and 89, and it was the French Revolution. And this was the birth of modern atheism, actually. When I'm speaking of the skeptic, the agnostic, they trace their roots to this, not to Charles Darwin, not to Richard Dawkins. Okay, this goes back to we've endured hundreds of years of religious oppression. We're throwing off religion entirely. That's still the atheism we have today. The atheism of today is not actually rational. It's got a lot of pretense and sophistry. Darwin is easily debunked. Darwin debunks Darwin. So it's not about rationalism. It's about an emotional reaction against religious persecution that the Bible calls Antichrist. So what happened in the French Revolution? They threw the baby out with the bathwater. Religion itself is bad and inherently violent and oppressive. Well, except Jesus. But they couldn't see past the particular Christians that they had been afflicted with, Christians. And Satan proved himself to be a master strategist. He has two opposites that are exactly the same in their principles. They both deny the Word of God and exercise violence. What kind of violence was this? Well, July 14, 1789. You're familiar maybe with the storming of the Bastille in the French Revolution, beginning with a mass uprising against monarchy, nobility, and clergy of all kinds. They didn't simply remove oppressive religion, they de-Christianized the nation by force. And in that context, something is going to be supreme. If you remove God entirely from a society, something is going to be in that top-notch position. And what is it here in this context? Force. It's who owns the guillotine and the masses who have the power and the weapons. It's force, or if you will, the state that they form, which they claim is some rational, enlightened state free from the superstitions of religion. But let me ask you something. When you form a new goddess and call her the goddess of reason and put her in the church instead of the Roman idols, this is just as religious as it ever was. It's just temples of reason. They can't avoid using religious language, can they, in the French Revolution? And also, when it was so enlightened and rational, this new modern revolution, how rational was the reign of terror, the bloodshed, indiscriminate bloodshed and violence and mass murder? It's not actually rational. It's bloodthirsty and demonic. Do you know one of the things the French Revolution established? This is in the Great Controversy. Revolutionary France reduced the union of marriage, the most sacred arrangement which human beings can form, and the permanence of marriage leads most strongly to the consolidation of society. And they reduced marriage to a state of mere civil contract, of a transitory character, which any two persons might engage in and cast loose at pleasure. Does that sound like a country you live in right now? Actually, we went even further because we went beyond man and woman. They were doing that, and Spirit of Prophecy is like, no, that's not good. That's interesting, because I remember during the marriage debates, 10 years ago, if you took the side defending traditional marriage, you're like, oh, you're the religious right. Quote the Great Controversy. It's clear we don't want to abandon the proper constitution of marriage to protect children, and that is a societal mandate. That is a public need. It says it leads most strongly to the consolidation of society, to protect the family unit. That's one of the roles of government. Robespierre's reign of terror wasn't called the reign of terror at the time. They had good PR. They called it the committees of public safety. So, yeah. Lesson learned by history: when you see intrusions, encroachments upon life and liberty and property, it's usually going to come under the guise of some nice-sounding thing. Homeland security, public health, public safety, taking our country back for God, climate justice, social justice. What am I missing? There are more, aren't they? There are all kinds of these PR veneers over the iron fist of tyranny. If it's a velvet glove, it changes nothing. Just as many were slaughtered during the reign of terror as during the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. This is why I say the two are opposites, but they're exactly the same. They operate on force. So this atheistic rule in France, if you were even suspected of being against the revolution, the guillotine was erected and you were dispensed with. This was a time where the prompt decapitation of tens of thousands of people is written in ink in the history books, and we seem to forget so easily. But if we forget our history, what are we doomed to do? Repeat it. So you get socialist revolutions, you get communist revolutions that arise, and you get the 20th century with more mass murder, genocide, democide, government-sanctioned or actual carried-out murder against populations in the tens of millions, upwards of 100 million, through the gulags, the killing fields, the gas chambers, and the cultural revolutions and persecutions. Spirit of Prophecy speaks specifically against these systems. I know it's kind of like trendy and cool to be like, yeah, I'm for helping the poor through socialism. That's kind of the cool thing on our campus, isn't it? But listen to this from Patriarchs and Prophets. There are many who urge with great enthusiasm that all men should have an equal share in the temporal blessings of God. You heard of these? There are many who urge with great enthusiasm, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. We ought to equalize the wealth redistribution into society to make everybody have an equal share of the temporal blessings of God. But this was not the purpose of the Creator, it says. A diversity of conditions, in other words, having people of a diversity of wealth access, is one of the means by which God designs to prove and develop character. Yet he intends that those who have worldly possessions shall regard themselves merely as stewards of his goods. Do you hear in that a free choice? Before God, I owe this to God that I take care of my fellow man, because you're entrusted with means to be employed for the benefit of the suffering and needy. It's no different than the religious right mandating worship and morality to have the religious left mandate and coerce generosity. It's the same principle at play. Speaking of the French Revolution and Sister White's writings, this is actually in the book Education. And it says, at the same time, anarchy is seeking to sweep away all law, not only divine, but human. This sounds like, again, our country today, descending into more anarchy and lawlessness in our urban centers, yes? The centralizing of wealth and power, so this is not a good. You're not hoping to have centralized wealth and power. That's part of the cause of the problem here. A diversity of condition is part of how God tests and proves our character. It's being permitted, because we're not going to use force to redistribute and do economic leveling. But it says here that when you get this centralizing of wealth and power in a society, you get vast combinations of the enriching of the few at the expense of the many. In other words, corruption, cronyism. You get the combinations of the poorer classes for the defense of their interests and claims, unions. And then this spirit of unrest, of riots and bloodshed, and the worldwide dissemination of the same teachings that led to the French Revolution. And all these things are tending to involve the whole world in a struggle similar to that which convulsed France. Are we seeing rumblings of French Revolution 2.0 in our society today? Be aware, because she made a specific prophecy about civil unrest in these same terms, not just in America, but India, China, Russia, and the cities of America. Thousands of men and women are dying of starvation. The moneyed men, because they have the power, control the market. They purchase at low rates all they can obtain and then sell at greatly increased prices. And this means starvation to the poorer classes, punchline, and will result in a... You realize there's a prophecy about coming civil unrest. Now, I'm using the term civil unrest because so many American history textbook students, they hear Civil War and they think war between the states. That's not the context of this. This is talking about more like revolution, like this quote. Revolutionary civil unrest types of scenarios. Now, that may have secession and states, battling against each other in some way, but that's a real warning. When we put these two back up on the screen side by side, we looked at the history of the Dark Ages so far and atheistic rule so far. We're going to come back to America, but you see that both of these are dangers and they're of the devil, right? In fact, they're all in prophecy. Both of those two are in prophecy. You can tell me what chapter the papacy is in Revelation, can you? Tell me what chapter in Revelation 13 is about the papacy and the mark of the beast. Oh, I didn't even mean to do that. It's this early sundown. It's got me all thrown off here. It's almost bedtime. What chapter of Revelation 13? Okay, it's Revelation 13. You all knew that, but can you tell me what chapter in Revelation is about the French Revolution? We don't know this as well, do we? You know it. Some of you know it. It's Revelation 11. Okay, so you can read the Great Controversy, read the whole section like chapters 3 through like 13 about the church descending into its Dark Ages form, and then the Waldenses and the Reformation pulling up and battling against the Roman system. Okay, so you read that portion of the Great Controversy. So that's Dark Ages church exposed. Do you know that there is a chapter in the Great Controversy about the French Revolution? 15, chapter 15. Read it. It's very important. In our prophecy series, we focus on the mark of the beast, third angel's message. Yes, important, more important. But as far as religious liberty is concerned, maintaining this balance in this tightrope and understanding this, portraying it all together so that we're not misunderstood and so that we have a clear understanding of the dangers of history and of our present world, I think are very important. We fail to present We fail to present religious liberty in a balanced way if we speak only of the papal Rome and America speaking like a dragon. If we fail to also speak of the evils of the atheistic regimes. If we fail to also celebrate America's founding. In other words, if we fail to do this one and this one, then we fail to present religious liberty in a balanced way. That's why we're doing this exercise the way we're doing it today. So let's switch to America. 7 ways the Declaration of Independence is informed by the Bible. The first one we kind of already covered. God's character. He gives within us a self-evident natural endowment to desire liberty. So the self-evident love for and right to life and liberty. Also, the Declaration of Independence says, quote, all men are created equal. Where did they get that idea from? Are they the first ones to come up with that? No, Paul in Galatians and in Acts says there is neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, all are one in Christ Jesus, and we are all his offspring. That doesn't mean we're all sons of God in the saved and adopted sense, but we are all his offspring, all of humanity. We are all created equal in the image of God to be restored to that image that has been marred by sin. This one, endowed by their Creator. Can you find that somewhere in the Bible? Oh yeah, there's a Creator. That's Genesis 1 and 2. Did you know that our founding documents recognize a Creator? You see, there's a difference between us and France. This isn't purely enforced secularism in America. And then it says, to secure these rights, governments are instituted. Remember that from Jefferson? He says, to secure these rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, governments are instituted. Have you ever asked yourself, what is the role of government? What is the purpose of government? Why is there a government? Why are governments instituted? Romans 13 tells us. It says that he bears the sword to minister vengeance upon the wrongdoer. And we're going to talk in just a minute about what wrongs would qualify as coming under the jurisdiction of the state, but we certainly have clearly that rights are going to be protected then through that, aren't they? If wrongs are being done in society, and there is the magistrate who bears the sword to punish the wrongdoer, then he's protecting the victim, isn't he? The one who had theft, murder, assault, whatever form of aggression or criminal act perpetrated upon them, they're protected by a properly constituted government. And that's where we get life, liberty, and property in the Declaration of Independence. Oops, it wasn't the Declaration of Independence. I decided to do something a little sneaky there. Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Where did I get life, liberty, and property from? Does anybody know? He said John Locke. I'm not as huge a fan of John Locke as Thomas Jefferson. So I get to cite an even better source than John Locke, the Bill of Rights. In the Fifth Amendment, it says that we cannot be deprived of life, liberty, and property without due process of law. So that's in our Constitution, which is a legal contract, the supreme law of the land. That's a pretty high authority to cite. So that's a good quote, even though it says pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence. I like life, liberty, and property even more because it reminds us of some of the 10 Commandments, yes? Are you allowed to murder somebody? No, they have a right to their life. Are you allowed to steal from somebody? No, they have a right to their property that they've earned. When government becomes destructive to these ends, Jefferson says in the Declaration of Independence, he goes on to explain what America was about to do in that situation. But I just want to focus on the fact that they observed, our founding fathers observed, that the one who bears the sword is supposed to punish the wrongdoer, but the one who bears the sword as the state itself can become destructive to life, liberty, and property. These ends. That means, what is the purpose of government? To secure rights. And when government itself isn't securing rights, but is destructive toward rights, then you have in a situation that is alluded to in the Bible in Psalm 146, verse 3. Do you know what this verse says? It says, put not your trust in what? Do you know? Princes. Why princes? I mean, I know elsewhere in the Psalms it says don't put your trust in man. That's good biblical counsel. But why does it specify even more prince? Like we're going to single out one particular class of men that are especially untrustworthy throughout history, maybe? Politicians? Those with power? Does power maybe corrupt a little bit? And absolute power maybe corrupt absolutely. Yeah, put not your trust in princes, God warned us long ago. That's 6 ways that the Declaration of Independence is informed by the Bible, but I'll give you a 7th. But before I go to the 7th, it's much more important to say what we do trust. than to say what we don't trust. It is important to study our history, learn and not be naive, and put our confidence in people that claim they have all truth and are the science, whatever. Put not your trust in princes, lesson learned. But let me pivot from that to the everlasting gospel of Jesus Christ, which needs to be our standpoint and sure foundation at all times. It reveals God's character when we talk about religious liberty. But in God's love, He met us in our need, in our sinful condition, and Jesus Christ proved Himself worthy of our trust by coming to this earth, living a perfect life, facing temptation at every point and overcoming, and then going to the cross and loving us to the end, or showing the full extent of His love, as it says in the modern translations, when He went that route and didn't save Himself. He didn't. He could have, but He didn't. Put your trust in Jesus. 'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus. There is not another being, not another person that has proven himself more trustworthy. Give Him your all, your heart, your life. Put not your trust in princes, but put it in Jesus. That's what this phrase actually recommends we do. We rely firmly on divine providence. America's founding was not like the French Revolution that would follow a decade or two later. America's founding did recognize that there is a creator. There's a creator who's involved in human affairs. Now, we're going to be careful with what that doesn't mean in a moment. But right now, it doesn't mean that we are the French Revolution 1.0. It's a different system entirely, and that's how you find all of these biblical concepts in the Declaration of Independence. So, controversial question for you. Brother Scott, does that mean America was founded as a Christian nation then? This is a sticky one. Be very careful when you wade into this question. I'm going to put two answers on the screen, okay? I like them both. I'm going to put two answers on the screen, and it all comes down to what do we mean by Christian nation? So I'm going to answer yes and I'm going to answer no, successively in that order. The prophecy about America's rise says that the nation would be lamb-like. So yes, America was founded as a Christian nation because Christian means Christ-like. And Jesus said, don't lord it over others. And when we extend religious liberty to all, that is the Christian thing to do. And therefore, America is a Christian nation in that it allows religious freedom. Now let's do the no version. I like both of these answers. Was America founded as a Christian nation then? No. Christianity is not the official religion of America because the first clause in the Bill of Rights that we're going to get to in a moment specifically prohibits America from being a Christian nation or a Jewish nation or a Muslim nation or any religion. Both of these are accurate statements. No matter how we engage in this conversation, I put these up just so we learn how to be careful in how we speak. Because if we don't really thoroughly define our terms, then we can be misunderstood about what we are saying. For example, if I'm speaking with an evangelical Christian friend, and they lean maybe toward the direction of, yes, America's a Christian nation, take America back for God, and I'm trying to win them to the present truth. If I come at them with, now you know America was not founded as a Christian nation, America is not a Christian nation, and you come at them with that kind of like not defining all your terms, you could be misunderstood and lose the opportunity to witness. Because there are elements of Christianity in our founding, i.e., we don't force our religion, which is what some of them are wanting to do, but you help win them over with the language, you see. Opposite, you're talking to somebody who's a secular-minded person, is concerned about the Christian nationalism that's arising, you can approach them on this very same slide. You can say, indeed, there is not a statement in the Constitution defining America as a Christian nation. It is correct, as we're going to study in the First Amendment, that America was not founded officially with Christianity as its official religion. And so you can say these in different contexts, and I like to say them both because I just like to teach and give a full picture. But America wasn't the first to tolerate minority religions. The Anabaptists way back in the 16th century, in the European continent, when Protestant nations had a state church and enforced that state church in many cases. The Anabaptists said, no, we will not bear the sword. We do not want the church and the state to be united. And they were the radical Reformation for their time. They get some good ink in the book, The Great Controversy. The Netherlands had a period of radical religious toleration. It was called the Dutch Golden Age. This is when the English pilgrims, the separatists, fled to the Netherlands for a time and lived there in Leiden. We'll actually talk about that tomorrow morning. William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, a Quaker, had no state church at all in the colony of Pennsylvania in the 17th century. Complete religious freedom. My favorite of all of them, because he taught this so clearly and so well, was Roger Williams. Very enlightened. He taught that the state has no business at all regulating the first 4 commandments out of the 10. The first 4 are about worship, aren't they? The first 4 are how we love God. Are we supposed to have laws telling us that we must love God? No, laws, you can't force love, right? So yeah, he said, hands off that one. Worship is between an individual and their creator, and it must be chosen. If it's forced, then you're a hypocrite to worship against your own will. He pointed this logic out at a time where it was not popular in Massachusetts Bay, and he was persecuted for it and founded Rhode Island. Then you get the latter 6 of the 10 commandments. That's where you find theft, murder, the family, marriage, protection of children. You get, how about bear false witness? Is that the government's jurisdiction? Yes, enforcement of contracts and telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth in legal settings. So there's application of all of these commandments all the way down the line, and including adultery. That's, as we read in the French Revolution, they perverted that institution and the state's role in that institution. While we're talking about the first and the last tables of the commandments, what do you guys make of this argument that was leveled at some promoting religious liberty during COVID? You guys who are making religious liberty objections to the vaccine mandates are in error, since Ellen White said that only when a specific commandment of the Decalogue is on the line, only then, if it's one of the 10, can you choose to obey God rather than men and say, I want to dissent from the law on this matter and I want an exemption from that. And since she said it's the commandments of the Decalogue that we may need to make sure to obey rather than man's authority, and since thou shalt not take a vaccine is not in the Decalogue, sorry, you are not using your religious liberty appropriately if you object to vaccine mandates. I actually heard a message during COVID arguing that what it did was it took Peter and Matthew, 2 of the disciples. Peter was more likely to get the sword out and lop an ear off. Matthew had been a tax collector, maybe a little more favorable to the system, the state, the Caesar, okay? And it said, Peter versus Matthew. Now you have all these, vaccine liberation enthusiasts and agitators out here. You guys need to think about Matthew's perspective on this a little more. And it starts with Jesus. Jesus shows them, he says, show me a coin. They show him the coin. And Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God's what is God's. And so Matthew would be more the give to Caesar what is Caesar guy, right? Because he's coming from the tax collector background and a little more favorable to Caesar. So it goes through, vaccines are safe, and Matthew would tell you they're effective, and Matthew would tell you that, if you are remaining unvaccinated, you're endangering yourself and others, and Matthew would tell you this, and Matthew would tell you that, and Matthew would tell you this. And then it concludes with the punchline, now give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. And my jaw hit the floor. I'm like, did I just hear what I thought I heard? What did Jesus say? Show me whose image is on the coin. Give to Caesar that which bears his image. Pay your taxes. But give to God that which bears God's image. What bears God's image? Me, my person, the living soul, flesh and blood. And so our health choices, spiritual choices between me and my God, or our health about my body, I render my body unto Caesar. That's what I took from that. Render your body unto Caesar, that completely inverts the teaching of Jesus. who said, render that to Caesar, but render this to God. And what is that in the Bible? The temple of the living God. And offer your bodies as a living what? Okay, you know your Bible well enough. When you hear sacrifice and you hear temple, you're hearing what kind of language? Worship language, yes? Worship language. Where is worship found? The first table or the second table? Worship is found in the first table of the Decalogue. Does the state have jurisdiction over my choices with the temple and the living sacrifice worship of God? No way. Have no other gods before me. It's there. It's in the first commandment. They have jurisdiction over the latter 6, but not over the first 4. It was an imposition into the conscience of individuals that was an atrocious violation of liberty. Not the first time, though. I named some very good examples like Roger Williams and William Penn, but one of the colonies was infamous for its religious oppression, and that was Massachusetts Bay Colony. They had many virtues. For all their virtues as a society, they did not understand religious liberty, not even close. Ask Anne Hutchinson, ask Roger Williams, read a biography about these. And they had been persecuted in England. The Church of England, a Protestant church, had persecuted the Puritans and had persecuted the separatists and anybody who was a dissenting faith than from the Anglican Church, the state church. And so these Puritans, who are now in America, they learned how you have dominion theology and how you rule as a church state over others. And the persecuted became the persecutors, doing the very thing that they were fleeing. It passed into the dustbin of history as we transitioned to America. What colony did the Bill of Rights, did the framers of our Constitution pattern and model themselves after? Was it Massachusetts Bay? You hear some people these days citing colonial state church, which actually continued during the Republic because the Bill of Rights was not yet incorporated at the state level. In the first half of the 19th century, there were still some state churches. A congregational church, no longer called Puritan, but congregational church was the state church of Massachusetts and Connecticut into, I think, the 1830s or 20s, if I remember correctly. But that aside, you'll hear them cite that. Vice President of the United States just did this. I don't mean to be political, but he was saying, the First Amendment wasn't meant to apply to states. Well, let's just talk about the federal level right now, because that's what the Bill of Rights initially was about. I'm going to read it, and you tell me which colony our National Bill of Rights was taking its principles from, Massachusetts Bay or Rhode Island. Let's say you already know. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Respecting means touching upon, relating to. You are not to write any laws about religious establishment. Not in America. There is no state church here. And you aren't to make any law prohibiting the free exercise of religion. Now, there's a lot more in the First Amendment. Wonderful things, freedom of speech, very important. The religious stuff is the first thing they put in the Bill of Rights, in the First Amendment. And the first clause of the first right in the First Amendment is the Establishment Clause. Do not form religious establishment where Christian dogma or any religious viewpoint is enforced upon the people. It is contrary to what we fought for in the American War for Independence. So they followed Roger Williams' principles. This is our tightrope of liberty. Now, speaking of tightropes, this one's really good. You're going to have to be a thinker on this one. One of these is theologically correct, yes? And one of these is theologically incorrect, yes? Okay, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. The one on the right is the theologically correct one. And every time Christians see the one on the left, they go, oh, here we go with neo-paganism, moral relativism, and subjectivism, and all roads lead to God, and all religions are equally valid. And like they did at the, what was it? It was a DNC 2016. The Methodist pastor gets up, and he goes in his opening prayer, oh, God of many names, and then prays. I'm like, what? Okay. False religion. Yes, we get that. But I want to ask us a question about the word coexist. What is the opposite of coexisting? Snuffing people out who disagree with you, right? It would be annihilation. So we believe Jesus is the way to the Father spiritually for our salvation. But the one on the left has its place in a pluralistic society to say, my Jewish neighbor, my Catholic neighbor, my Muslim neighbor has the freedom, he has the right to be wrong in a free society. And the God of heaven doesn't even force. So how much more should we affirm? Yes, we will coexist, and it can't coexist for eternity because truth and error cannot occupy the same territory in God's kingdom. We know that will be brought to an end, and we want to win as many souls as we can in the process. But taking that one on the left and tearing it down and saying, no, we don't want to coexist, is probably some bait from the devil that we don't want to take, because then we come off as dominion theology bigots ourselves. But is there a limit to this coexist concept? I mean, what if my religion says I practice ritual human sacrifice? Is that allowed? Well, of course not, because that's thou shalt not murder in the 10 Commandments. This is not made up. Satanic Temple says religious freedoms exempt them from state laws where they get to have abortions that are not permitted by state law because it's a ritual of their religion to take the life of a child. This was lodged in the courts as their own appeal legally. They said, First Amendment, free exercise of religion, free exercise clause. You can't make a law prohibiting the free exercise of our religion. Part of our religion is sacrificing children, sacrificing babies. It's a religious ritual. That is dark. That is not what we're going for when we look at the First Amendment, saying free exercise of religion. That's why abortion laws are not a violation of liberty of conscience. Abortions are a violation of liberty because the baby will never get to choose what day to worship on if he's murdered before he's born. This is an essential religious freedom. The right to life is a religious freedom, yes? So you don't, in summary, coerce any variety of religion, Christian or otherwise, but neither do you obliterate nature's God and natural rights, as the Declaration of Independence explains. It's in our founding documents. You don't mandate what day people rest on. You don't contrive a Marxist meta-narrative that's equivalent to a violent repressive religion of its own sort in the cultic sense. You don't police speech and have cancel culture that removes people's conscience to say what they believe. You don't impose a climate earth worship religion. What is it that makes America, that's just a few examples, you could go on and on, but what is it, as we close, that makes America exceptional, distinct, and different? Now, I'm going to use that word exceptional. If you do that in the history profession, you just lost all the credibility. Oh, American exceptionalism. We're supposed to scoff at that altogether in our group, in our community. Be a thinker, not a mere reflector of other men's thoughts. America's founding documents are exceptional. I mean that just factually. They're different. They're distinct. Now, you could say they're exceptionally good or they're exceptionally bad. Maybe you like the French Revolution better. Maybe you like papal Rome better. I like our founding documents. They're certainly distinct and different. They're exceptional. I say exceptionally good because it's a system that neither denies God, it doesn't make the state God, or the Pope God. It doesn't deny God. We have a Creator who's endowed us with our rights. Where did our rights come from? The Creator. If they came from the state, then they're not rights. They're not natural rights. If the state dispenses privileges, they can withhold them as well. And it's not a human right, a natural right. Natural right. Nature's God, our God, has given us these rights. We don't deny God, and we don't enforce God because we believe in Jesus' teaching that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and we don't do that. So the papal and the atheistic are two sides of the same coin, are they not? Coin of repression and removing religious freedom and imposing a new religion, whether that's atheism or another, upon the people. The American Republic, founded by Protestants, acknowledged the Creator, didn't enforce religion, didn't restrict freedom of conscience, and thus, this is where we get to the last verse of Revelation 12. What is the last verse? After the earth helps the woman, in Revelation 12, what's the last verse in Revelation 12? You have it memorized. The dragon was wroth with the woman who went off to make war with the remnant of her seed, who have the commandments of God and the testimony of Jesus. Do you make the connection here? Why is it that America, not France, not Rome, became the wellspring of missionary work and the seat and growth point for the Second Advent awakening of the 19th century? This is so beautiful in prophecy. What a privilege to celebrate religious liberty, to remember we're given liberty for a purpose right here. That's central to who we are. We exercise our religious liberty. We don't just look at it and say, isn't that nice, and do nothing with it. Let's get busy about the work of God because we've seen Him as He is. We've seen His character of love. We want to witness to those around us by being of a practical assistance to them and being an entering wedge and talking of the things they're talking of and say, hey, you know this stuff is in prophecy. You want to study prophecy together? Thank you so much for the opportunity to share tonight. Tomorrow morning we will continue the celebrating of this tightrope of liberty by looking at American history, and we're going to see the founding generation as well as the Pilgrim Fathers of the Mayflower, because we're near Thanksgiving, so I think it's time to revisit those guys. Do you want me to have a prayer for the meal? Okay, so we're going right. You don't need to have any closing? All right. Well, okay, so we're going to have a little break after the prayer. So, Father in heaven, we thank you so much for revealing yourself to us once again. We want to know you more, for that is eternal life. We want to follow Jesus more closely and embrace and live out his principles the way that he's taught us to live. Help us to be that witness and follow through with the remnant of her seed finishing this work in these last days.